You walk into the past like you're trespassing. The air is stale, thick with candle wax and secrets. Wood groans beneath your boots, and the walls lean too close, whispering in a language that predates reason. This isn't the powdered wig version of Colonial America. This is the one they don't teach. The one buried 6 feet under the school books, where pain wasn't just punishment, it was an art. Behind every whitewashed church steeple and tobacco farm was a darker room, a locked cellar, a bloody stump of wood and a bucket of screams. And now you're in it. You duck under a low doorway. A rusted iron hook dangles from the ceiling like a forgotten warning. Shadows ripple on the walls, thick, sticky things that don't move right. You're not here to admire antiques. You came for the truth. And the truth has teeth. Let's start with something simple, painful, intimate. The iron bit looks harmless, like a horse's bridle. Except this one's made for you. The iron bit was shoved into a person's mouth, locked behind their teeth like a gag made by a sadist. You couldn't eat. You couldn't talk. If you drooled or vomited, it just sat there until you choked on it. Used mostly on enslaved people who talked back or complained, also known as being human. They wore it for days, sometimes weeks. The edges cut the lips. The metal rusted in the mouth. Tongues swelled like rotten meat. And all that while, plantation owners sipped sweet tea and quoted Bible verses about obedience. Civilization, they called it. You'd call it slow-motion suffocation. You picture a teenage girl forced to wear it for smiling at the wrong person. Now imagine her trying to sleep, to drink, to scream. Imagine being told you're evil because you bled on their furniture. You hear footsteps above. Something drips from the ceiling, and you realize that wasn't the worst one. The whipping tree whispers. You step outside, hoping for air dot, but the world out here is no safer. The tree waits, big, wide, probably 100 years old by now. Its roots curl like claws, and its bark is slick with moss. And something else. You walk closer. The trunk is scarred. Grooved deep, over and over, not by weather, by whips. They called it the whipping tree. A simple name for something that devoured people. Enslaved men, women and children were tied up here, backs exposed. RIBC showing. Then came the lash, not once, not 10 times. Up to 100, depending on how merciful the overseer was feeling. Spoiler, he usually wasn't. The whip tore deep. Blood flew like red ribbons across the clearing, and when the skin peeled off completely, they poured salt into the wounds to keep it clean. Clean is a hell of a word when your flesh is hanging in strips. Some victims passed out. Some convulsed. Some died, most didn't. Because pain was only valuable if you lived to feel it longer. You step around the tree. There's a rusted iron ring nailed into the bark, still there after 2 centuries. You reach for it. It's warm, and for a moment, you hear the screams again. The spike collar and the sound of breathing. You find it in a wooden crate buried beneath hay. A ring of rusted iron, thick as your wrist. Inside it spikes. Not sharp enough to pierce, but perfect for pressure. The cruel kind. This is the iron collar. A wearable torture device. It was designed to make pain personal. The spikes pressed into your neck, jaw, shoulders. You could breathe, but only if you kept perfectly still. And humans? We're not built for stillness. Try eating, sleeping, even turning your head. Every twitch dug the spikes deeper. Some collars were rigged with bells or metal flaps, so if you moved, everyone knew. They called it discipline. It was psychological warfare. People wore them for days, sometimes weeks. Imagine trying to pray, to talk to your child, to scratch your ear. You ever get a tag in your shirt that itches all day? Multiply that by 1,000 and add blood loss. Sometimes the collar was attached to a chain or a post. Sometimes the wearer was forced to work while wearing it. Work, with a torture device sawing into your vertebrae. You lift the collar. The weight surprises you. It's heavier than guilt. Tar, feathers, and the crowd. You move through the town square. The sun is high. People chatter like it's market day. But then you smell it. Boiling tar. Tar and feathering. Sounds cartoonish. Like something from a kid's book. Wrong. You see the barrel. Black goo bubbling like a witch's brew. And next to it, someone stripped to the waist. Tied down. Terrified. This punishment wasn't for slaves. This one was for citizens. Colonists used it on tax collectors, loyalists, traitors, and sometimes just people they didn't like. It was mob justice, covered in molasses. They'd boil the tar until it was hot enough to burn skin off on contact. Then pour it slowly over the victim's chest, back and face. Screams echoed off the brick walls. Tar clung to flesh like molten glue. Then came the feathers. Not soft, they stuck like tiny razors, and then the parade. The victim was marched through town in agony, mocked, spit on, sometimes tied to a cart and dragged. If they were lucky, they died from the burns or infection. If they weren't, well, they got to live with the scars. Because nothing says justice like burning someone and calling it patriotism. You watch the townsfolk laugh as they smear tar on a man's face. He screams for mercy, and a child throws a feather like it's confetti. The camera zooms in on his eyes. They are pleading, and no one is listening. You walk away. But the sound follows you. You think it can't get worse, but the next room holds the device that doesn't just torture your body, it kills your identity. Branding the soul. The cellar smells like burnt meat and wet iron. You don't want to go down here, but you do, because this is where they left the worst souvenirs. You see the branding iron before you see the fire. It hangs on the wall like a holy relic, a simple iron rod with a letter at the end. Sometimes an R for runaway. Sometimes T for thief. Sometimes it was just an S, slave. They didn't care what it stood for. They cared that it burned. Branding was colonial graffiti carved into your body for everyone to see. The iron was heated until it glowed. Then pressed, without hesitation, into bare skin. Shoulder, chest, cheek. The hiss was instant. The scream was longer. You try to imagine the moment after, when the pain goes dull, but the shame begins. When your skin tells your story before your mouth ever can. But wait, they said, it wasn't punishment, it was identification. Sure, and a knife isn't a weapon, it's a kitchen tool. Enslaved people branded for trying to escape. Servants branded for stealing a loaf of bread. Women branded for speaking too freely. And once that mark was on you, there was no hiding. You were merchandise now. And merchandise doesn't get mercy. The stock's public shame this sport. You step into the town square again. But now it's night. A pale moon washes the world in silver. And the laughter you hear isn't joyful. It's mean. There's someone in the stocks. The colonial stocks were wooden frames that locked your head and hands in place. You couldn't sit. You couldn't move. And you definitely couldn't hide. For hours or days you stood there, bent forward, humiliated while everyone else treated you like a carnival game. Rotten food, mud, spit, urine, feces, all legal. All encouraged. Kids would throw rocks. Grown men would whisper death threats. And the preacher would say it was for your soul. Nothing says redemption like being pelted with horse dung by your neighbors. Some people passed out from blood loss or dehydration. Some were permanently paralyzed from the position. Others, mostly women, were sexually assaulted while locked in. But the worst part? The stocks weren't in a dungeon. They were right out in the open. Everyone saw you. Everyone judged you, and when they released you, you never walked the same again. You move past the frame. Something wet drips from the wood. It's not rain. Mutilation by law. This part of the story isn't theatrical. It's surgical, because the colony didn't just punish. It edited people. You find a chair. It's splintered and stained. Not a torture device, technically, but what happened in it was. Mutilation was legal, encouraged, biblical. If you were enslaved and ran away, you could lose a toe, or a foot, or an ear. Second offense, branding. Third, castration. And if you were white and poor, you weren't safe either. Steal a chicken, lose a finger, lie in court, tongue pierced with a red-hot awl, blasphemy, have your ears nailed to a post until they ripped off trying to escape. And they say colonial America was founded on freedom. Technically true if you define freedom as having the freedom to be publicly disfigured. One Virginian slave code even allowed slitting tendons to prevent escape. Imagine trying to walk with your Achilles sliced. No trial. No doctor. Just someone with a knife and a grudge. You feel the phantom pain in your own legs, and you wonder how many ghosts this place holds. Not dead ones. The living kind. The ones who survived and wished they hadn't. The cage that never opens. You find it in a barn, hanging from the rafters, like something that belongs to a bird too evil for hell. A human-sized cage, metal bars, hinged door, no padding, no escape. They called it the hanging cage or the gibbet, and it was a sentence worse than death. Used for public display, often after execution, but sometimes before. They'd stuff you in it, alive, and hang it high for the town to see. You'd bake in the sun, freeze at night. Crows would land on your shoulders, rats would climb your legs. You couldn't move, couldn't sleep, couldn't die fast enough. Let this be a warning, they said, and it was. A warning that they didn't need a reason. Gibbets were often placed at crossroads or riverbanks, places where people couldn't avoid looking. People would bring their children to see you, to learn obedience. Sometimes, the cage stayed up long after the person inside was dead. Decaying, swaying in the wind, bones clacking together like wind chimes from hell. You step underneath it, it creaks. And for a second, you hear breath. You look up. The cage is empty. Or maybe it just looks that way. You've seen pain, humiliation, despair. But what's coming next isn't about what they did to bodies. It's what they did to the mind. And how torture doesn't always stop when the bleeding does. The silence room. It doesn't look like a torture chamber, which is exactly why it works. A small room, plain walls, no windows, no sounds except your own heartbeat. The silence room wasn't officially listed in punishment records, but journals mention it. Whispers of it. A room where they didn't touch you at all. They just locked you inside. Alone. For a day. For a week. For 40 days in one known case. Food slid under the door. A bucket in the corner. No light. No sound. No escape from your own thoughts. And you thought your childhood timeout was bad. They used it on insubordinate servants, on enslaved people who didn't respond to lashes, on those considered possessed or untrustworthy. A room where your brain chewed itself from the inside out. Some came out screaming. Others stopped talking forever. You run your hand along the wall. It's been scratched raw. You hear something. Not a voice, not a sound, just pressure. A presence. It's the silence, and it wants to stay. The twister's chair. You think you've seen all the devices. You're wrong. In a rotting barn behind a plantation house, you find a thing that doesn't belong. It's a chair, made of oak, studded with dull iron screws. There's a crank on the side. It looks handmade, which is what makes it worse. The twister's chair wasn't imported. It wasn't European. It was American innovation, colonial DIY cruelty. The victim was tied down ankles, wrists, waist. Then came the twisting. Not of limbs, of joints. The crank controlled a series of cords connected to the victim's fingers and toes. Each turn rotated the digits backwards slowly, precisely. Pop, twist, crack. We're not barbarians, the torturer might have said. We just believe in correction. Disobedient child, crank. Servant who talked too much, crank. Wife who asked questions, crank. They rarely used it to kill. It was designed for something else. Permanent deformation. Hands that would never hold again. feet that would never walk right, a body that always remembered the pain. And you standing here, hand on the crank, feel the temptation to turn it, just once. The twist, a nation built by the broken. You finally start to piece it all together, not just the devices, not just the cruelty, but the design. Each punishment didn't just inflict pain. It erased identity. The branding made you property, the collar made you silent, the whip made you obedient, the cage made you invisible. And the silence room, well, that one turned you into a ghost with a pulse. It wasn't justice, it was engineering. And here's the twist they won't admit in textbooks. The ones who built this nation didn't just rely on torture. They designed it. They scaled it. They perfected it. You find a letter in an old chest, written by a wealthy landowner. He's complaining about the price of iron collars, asking if his cousin in Boston can send more. He signs it, J.H. Adams. Yes, those Adams. The ones with statues, founding fathers. Your stomach drops. What if the people we celebrate weren't the heroes of liberty, but the architects of silence? What if the American experiment was born not from freedom, but from control? Your mind spins, and you realize the final torture device wasn't metal. It was a lie. The hangman's legacy. You step outside. The sun is rising, but it doesn't feel like morning. In the center of the town stands one final device. Simple, iconic, a scaffold. The hangman's noose sways gently in the breeze, like a finger beckoning you closer. Hanging, you already know it. But you don't know how they did it. In colonial America, hanging was slow. The drop wasn't designed to snap the neck. It was designed to strangle, to let the body dance, to let the legs kick, to let everyone watch. Some towns held weekly hangings. Crowds brought snacks. Children clapped. And the hangman? He wasn't a monster. He was often the same man who rang the church bell on Sundays. Because nothing says godly nation like choking a man on Saturday and reading Psalms the next morning. You walk past the rope. It swings toward you. And for a moment, you see yourself there. Not because you deserve it, but because you've learned too much. History doesn't like its secrets aired out. It prefers shadows, silence, obedience. You walk away from the scaffold. But something tells you it's not over. It never is, because these devices, they didn't just break bones. They built a country. You were told this land was founded on freedom. But if you listen close, beneath the anthems and marble statues, you can still hear the gears turning. And the screaming never really stopped. Sound of a whip cracking, then silence. The tools are gone now, rusted, buried, forgotten. But the pain? That didn't vanish. It became the empire. It's in the laws, the land, the lineage. This isn't just history. This is the foundation. You've just scratched the surface. If you're ready to dig deeper into the lies, the bloodlines, the empires built on broken bodies, subscribe to Blood and Empire. And remember, every great nation has its torture chamber. Most just learned how to hide it.